What was the ultimate price of Maury Muehleisen's success? Fame? Money? Or total obliteration? How did his guitar become the soul of immortal hits while his name remained a secret? Was his collaboration with Jim Croce the greatest achievement of his life? Or was it the moment his own career was officially murdered? And the cruelest paradox, was the plane crash that turned his partner into an immortal legend also the final act that completely erased his existence? Ironically, the origins of that subtle, complex, almost architectural guitar style, a musical soul nearly wiped out entirely, lie in a place that seems unlikely to have produced it. It is a world shaped by steel, sweat, and the steady, hard rhythm of American industry. Our story begins on January 14, 1949, in Trenton, New Jersey. In the post-war boom of the late 1940s and 50s, Trenton was a quintessential American industrial city. It was a place where the skyline was marked by the silhouettes of steel mills and rubber factories, a city that ran on the relentless, churning energy of its working-class heart. The famous "Trenton makes, the world takes" bridge sign was not a boast. It was a simple statement of fact. This was a city that built things, a world of timetables, factory whistles, and the tangible results of a hard day's labor. Maurice Thomas Muehleisen, known to everyone as Maury, was born into a world that was both a part of this industrial landscape and a quiet, deliberate refuge from it. His was a stable, comfortable middle-class family, a small island of domestic tranquility in a sea of industry. His father was an engineer, a man of precision and logic, a man who understood the world through slide rules and blueprints. His mother was a homemaker who curated the family's cultural life with the same meticulous care. Their home was a sanctuary, and in that sanctuary the dominant sound was not the clang of steel from the nearby factories, but the soaring, complex harmonies of classical music. They were lovers of art and culture. Their evenings often spent gathered around the warm glow of the radio, listening to the local station WTTM. It broadcast a sophisticated mix of the elegant swing of big band jazz masters like Count Basie and, most importantly, the timeless, structured works of the great classical composers. This was the environment that shaped Maury's earliest years. He and his younger sister, Mary, who would one day become the devoted keeper of his memory, were encouraged to embrace this world of culture. The Muehleisen household was not one of hardship or tragedy. It was a place of warmth, stability, and quiet encouragement. This dual education, the ambient, powerful rhythm of the industrial city, and the formal, intricate structure of the classical music in his home instilled in Maury a unique and profound sensibility. From the world outside his door, he absorbed a sense of diligence, a quiet, unassuming work ethic, and a deep appreciation for things that were well made. From the world inside his home, he learned the formal language of melody, harmony, and structure. The spark that would ignite his life's passion was struck at the age of 9. In 1958, his parents, in keeping with their belief in a well-rounded education, enrolled him in formal piano lessons with a local teacher in Trenton. This was not with the aim of creating a professional musician or a child star. It was seen as a vital part of a cultured upbringing, as essential as learning literature or history. But for Maury, it was something more. He was a natural. He took to the instrument with a quiet, focused intensity that was remarkable for a boy his age. His young hands, guided by the disciplined instruction of his teacher, quickly began to master the complex, interwoven melodies of his parents' favorite composers, Bach and Beethoven. He didn't just play the notes, he seemed to understand them. He loved the mathematical precision of a Bach fugue, the logical beauty of its interlocking lines. He was captivated by the romantic, stormy passion of a Beethoven sonata, The piano became his first true language, a language of discipline, structure, and intricate, beautiful patterns that made perfect sense to his thoughtful, analytical mind. He was, by all accounts, a quiet, studious, and deeply introspective boy. He was a classical soul growing up in the heart of a blue-collar industrial town, a unique combination that would one day produce a sound the world had never heard before. Maury Muehleisen continued his classical piano studies with quiet dedication throughout his youth. He became an accomplished player, his talent showcased in school recitals and small local events. He was a musician, but his relationship with music was, for many years, a private and academic one. In an era when the first explosive wave of rock and roll was captivating the youth of America, Maury remained in his own, more ordered world. There are no recorded stories of him being in teenage rock and roll bands, no tales of him chasing the rebellious blues-based sounds of Elvis or Chuck Berry. His world was the elegant, structured, and emotionally contained world of the classics. And then in the mid-1960s, a new sound, a new voice, began to ripple through the cultural landscape of America, a sound that would change the course of his life. It was the sound of the great American folk revival. While attending Glassboro State College in his home state of New Jersey around 1966, Maury, like so many thoughtful, introspective young people of his generation, was utterly captivated by this new wave of music. This was the era of the singer-songwriter, the age of the poet with an acoustic guitar. It was a movement that valued words as much as melodies, and personal expression as much as technical skill. It was the sound of Bob Dylan's fiercely intelligent, world-changing lyrics, which had elevated the pop song into a form of high literature. It was the pure, angelic, and politically charged voice of Joan Baez. It was the intricate, beautiful, and almost mathematically perfect harmonies of duos like Simon and Garfunkel. For Maury, this was a revelation. This was music that was smart, that was personal, that told stories about the real world. It possessed an emotional directness and a lyrical depth that the abstract, instrumental world of classical music, for all its beauty, often lacked. It was a bridge from the world of the head to the world of the heart. He was inspired not just to listen, but to participate. He decided he needed to learn a new instrument, the chosen instrument of this new movement. He picked up the acoustic guitar. This was a pivotal, life-altering moment. Crucially, Maury approached the guitar not as a rock and roller or a bluesman, but as a classically trained pianist. He brought with him a decade of disciplined training, a deep and sophisticated understanding of music theory, and a unique two-handed approach to melody and harmony. He didn't just learn to strum the 3 basic chords of a folk song. From the very beginning, he thought of the guitar as a polyphonic instrument, much like his piano. He developed a unique and highly advanced finger-style technique. His thumb became the left hand of the piano, holding down a steady melodic bass line. His fingers became the right hand, weaving intricate, delicate, and often complex melodies on top. It was a conversation between his two hands, a form of contrapuntal playing that was far more sophisticated than the work of almost any of his contemporaries in the folk scene. He was, in essence, playing Bach on a 6-string guitar, but in the service of a modern, story-driven song. This unique and beautiful fusion of skills, the disciplined precision of a classical musician, and the warm, organic, and heartfelt sensibilities of a modern folk artist, would soon become his secret weapon. It was a sound that was quiet, but it was a sound that would soon make a very loud noise. The late 1960s were a fertile time for this new kind of artist. The East Coast, from the legendary coffee houses of Greenwich Village in New York to the vibrant and burgeoning club scene in Philadelphia, was a hotbed of the singer-songwriter movement. It was a world that valued originality, lyrical depth, and, above all, musical craftsmanship. Maury Muehleisen, the quiet boy from the piano room, now armed with his acoustic guitar and a growing portfolio of his own beautifully crafted, intricate songs, was about to step into that world and make his mark. While still a student at Glassboro State College around 1967, Maury Muehleisen began to test the waters of this new world. He started performing at local coffee houses and small folk clubs in the circuit that connected the suburban towns of New Jersey with the burgeoning Philadelphia music scene. He was a quiet, unassuming presence on stage. He didn't have the swagger of a rock star or the weathered charisma of a road-worn folk singer. He was just a young man with a guitar, but when he played, the room would fall silent. His songs were a direct reflection of his personality. They were thoughtful, deeply introspective, and meticulously, beautifully crafted. His lyrics were personal and poetic, often tinged with a gentle melancholy. His melodies were often complex and unexpected, soaring in surprising directions, betraying his sophisticated classical roots. But it was his guitar playing that truly set him apart, that made other musicians in the room stop and listen with a mixture of awe and envy. In an era of hard-strumming, protest-shouting folk singers, Maury's style was a revelation of delicacy and intricacy. He played with a light, precise, and astonishingly clean touch, his fingers seeming to dance effortlessly across the fretboard. He wasn't just playing chords, he was weaving beautiful, Baroque patterns of notes, creating a shimmering, self-contained orchestra that served as the perfect, elegant counterpoint to his gentle, heartfelt vocals. His talent was too great, too unique to remain a local secret for long. In 1969, through a network of friends and fellow musicians who were mesmerized by his playing, he was introduced to a pair of ambitious young producers who were making a significant name for themselves in the New York music scene, Terry Cashman and Tommy West. Cashman and West were on the lookout for new original talent for the legendary Capitol Records, the home of the Beatles and the Beach Boys. In Maury Muehleisen, they heard something truly special and utterly unique. They were immediately and deeply impressed by his sophisticated songwriting, his unique and beautiful blend of classical harmony and modern folk melody. They signed him to a production deal and, with the backing of Capitol, brought him into the studio to record his debut album. In April of 1970, that album, titled Gingerbread, was released. It was a beautiful, fully realized expression of Maury's unique artistic vision. The 10 original songs were a masterclass in folk pop craftsmanship. The sound was a delicate, airy fusion of folk, pop, and hints of the Baroque chamber pop sound that artists like the Zombies and the Left Banquet had pioneered. Maury played all the intricate acoustic guitar parts, sang the lead vocals, and arranged the lush, multi-layered harmonies that were a hallmark of his sound. The production by Cashman and West was tasteful and elegant, a warm, organic frame that perfectly complemented Maury's beautiful, intricate songs. The album was a critical success. The few reviewers who heard it praised its sophisticated musicality, its emotional honesty, and the sheer understated beauty of Maury's guitar work. It was hailed as the debut of a major new talent, a musician of rare and special gifts. But in the crowded, noisy, and increasingly polarized marketplace of 1970, critical praise didn't translate into commercial success. Gingerbread was a profound commercial failure. The album sold only an estimated 10,000 copies and failed to make even the smallest dent on the Billboard charts. In a world that was being pulled in two directions, towards the heavy blues-based thunder of hard rock and the glittery theatrical excess of glam rock. Maury's quiet, gentle, and introspective music simply got lost in the noise. It was perhaps a beautiful, intricate clock in an age of sledgehammers. Capitol Records, a major label in the business of selling hits, was disappointed by the poor sales. They quickly and unceremoniously dropped him from their roster. The failure of his debut album was a crushing, disorienting blow for the young, sensitive artist. The dream of a solo career, a dream that had seemed so close, had been extinguished almost as soon as it was lit. He was forced to return to the familiar, often thankless circuit of small clubs and coffee houses in Philadelphia and New York. He was now a critically acclaimed artist with no record deal, an uncertain future, and a box of unsold records. His masterpiece had been released, but the world, it seemed, had not been listening. But to understand the sacrifice that was to come, one must first understand the victim. What exactly was Gingerbread? Listen closely. This is not simple folk music. These are miniature symphonies. The lyrics are deeply poetic and introverted, a world away from the earthy, barroom boasts of a Big Jim Walker. The song structures are complex, full of unexpected harmonic shifts and melodic detours that are pure Baroque. This is the music of a thinker, of a classical pianist composing on a 6-string guitar. It was beautiful, it was meticulous, and in the noisy, polarized market of 1970, it was commercially invisible. When Maury Muehleisen eventually agreed to become Jim Croce's sideman, he was, consciously or not, placing this deeply personal, complex part of his artistry into a box. It was the first and perhaps greatest artistic sacrifice. The path that led Maury Muehleisen to Jim Croce was paved by the very producers who had overseen his first and seemingly last attempt at stardom. Terry Cashman and Tommy West, despite the commercial failure of Gingerbread, remained firm, passionate believers in Maury's immense and unique talent. They knew he was a world-class musician who just needed the right vehicle. At the same time, they were beginning to work with another very different kind of singer-songwriter from the Philadelphia area, an artist they were convinced was destined to be a star. His name was Jim Croce. He was a few years older than Maury, a charismatic, mustachioed man with a warm, lived-in, everyman voice and a gift for storytelling that was second to none. He was not a product of the conservatory or the coffee house. He was a man who had paid his dues in the real world. He had worked a string of tough, blue-collar jobs, truck driver, construction worker, welder, all while honing his craft at night in the rough-and-tumble bars and honky-tonks of Pennsylvania. He wrote songs that were like miniature short stories, populated by a cast of unforgettable, larger-than-life, yet deeply human characters. Hustlers, pool sharks, tough guys with hearts of gold, and lonely, heartbroken lovers. He was a modern-day folk troubadour, a storyteller in the grand American tradition of Mark Twain and Will Rogers. Cashman and West knew they had a star on their hands. Jim's songs were brilliant, funny, poignant, and instantly relatable. But they also knew they needed a special kind of musical accompaniment to make those songs truly shine on a record. They needed more than just a standard backing band. They needed a musician with a rare and special touch, someone who could complement Jim's earthy, straightforward storytelling with a layer of melodic sophistication and grace. They needed a musical partner, a co-conspirator, a secret weapon, and they knew exactly who to call. In early 1972, Tommy West arranged a meeting. He brought the quiet, unassuming Maury Muehleisen to Jim Croce's home in the rural farmlands of Lindell, Pennsylvania. The two men were, on the surface, a study in complete contrasts. Jim was the gregarious, outgoing, world-weary storyteller, his music rooted in the raw, earthy traditions of barroom blues, country, and old-time rock and roll. Maury was the quiet, introspective, classically trained prodigy. His music, a delicate, intricate fusion of folk and Baroque harmony. But when they sat down in the kitchen with their guitars, something magical and immediate happened. Jim was instantly and utterly captivated by Maury's playing. He had never heard anything like it. Maury didn't just strum chords behind him as other guitarists did. He wove intricate, melodic, contrapuntal lines around Jim's vocals, creating a beautiful, shimmering, and constantly moving counterpoint. His playing was like a second voice in the song, a voice that could echo a song's sadness, underline its humor, and amplify its joy. The classically trained precision of his finger-picking, the unexpected and beautiful chord voicings, were the perfect, elegant frame for Jim's rough-hewn, heartfelt stories. The musical chemistry was instantaneous and undeniable. As Jim would later say, it was like he had been a singer with one arm, and in Maury, he had finally found his other arm. Jim asked Maury, on the spot, to become his lead guitarist, his harmony vocalist, and his full-time musical partner for his upcoming album sessions and tours. For Maury, whose own solo career had stalled in the wake of Gingerbread's failure, this was a lifeline. It was a chance to be a professional musician again, to work with a songwriter of immense talent, and to be a part of something he knew was special. He accepted without hesitation. This was the beginning of one of the most perfect and most tragically brief musical partnerships in the history of American music. They were the perfect team, their strengths and weaknesses perfectly complementing each other. Jim was the voice, the heart, and the stories. Maury was the soul, the intellect, and the sound. Together, they were about to create a string of timeless classics that would captivate a nation. The quiet man from Trenton had found his true calling, not as a star in his own right, but as the silent, essential, and brilliant partner to a shooting star. The partnership was forged. The storyteller had found his musical soulmate, and the quiet prodigy had found his voice, not in the glare of the spotlight, but in the beautiful, intricate spaces between the notes. Together, Jim Croce and Maury Muehleisen were a perfect, self-contained unit, a blend of street-smart grit and classical grace. They were about to enter the studio and create a sound that would define the early 1970s. The world was about to fall in love with the voice of Jim Croce, but what they would also be falling in love with, whether they knew it or not, was the sublime, unforgettable sound of Maury Muehleisen's guitar. The partnership between Jim Croce and Maury Muehleisen was more than just a collaboration. It was a conversation. It was a dialogue between two distinct but perfectly complementary musical souls, and the world was about to be invited to listen in. In 1972, they entered the studio with Cashman and West to begin work on an album that would make Jim Croce a household name. And from the very first notes, Maury's presence was the secret ingredient that made it all work. The album that would introduce this new partnership to the world was to be called You Don't Mess Around with Jim. On paper, it was Jim Croce's solo album, his big break after years of struggle and disappointment. But in its soul, in its very DNA, it was a duo record, a testament to the incredible, almost magical chemistry between Jim's voice and Maury's guitar. Maury's role in the studio was far more than that of a simple sideman or a hired hand. He was, in a very real sense, the album's musical architect. Producers Terry Cashman and Tommy West, who had seen the commercial failure of Maury's own complex solo work, now had the perfect context for his genius. They understood that his intricate melodic playing was the thread that could weave through every single track, providing the harmonic and rhythmic foundation upon which Jim's straightforward, powerful stories could unfold and take flight. Listen to the classic track that would become one of Croce's most beloved ballads, Operator. It's a masterpiece of narrative songwriting, a lonely late-night phone call from a heartbroken man trying to find the number of an old flame who has run off with his former best friend. While Jim's warm, empathetic voice carries the heartbreaking story, making every listener feel the weight of his regret, it is Maury's guitar that provides the song's deep, melancholic soul. His playing is a masterclass in understated elegance. It is not a solo in the traditional sense. It is a conversation with the vocal. It's a beautiful flowing river of notes, a cascade of arpeggios and delicate bass lines that perfectly mirrors the song's feeling of quiet desperation and lingering hope. It's the sound of memory, of regret, of a tear falling onto the cool metal of a payphone receiver. It's a performance of such intuitive grace that it's almost impossible to imagine the song existing without it. This is the moment where, in a documentary, we would freeze the frame. The track for Operator swells. Jim Croce's vocal fades down, leaving only Maury's guitar track, isolated and pushed to the forefront. For the first time, the audience truly hears what they had previously only felt. This is not strumming. It is an independent contrapuntal melody. His thumb holds a steady anchoring bass line, while his fingers weave a second fluid, shimmering melody that runs in parallel to Jim's story. It is conversing with the vocal. When Croce sings of his pain, the guitar doesn't just sympathize, it offers a commentary, a reflection, as if it were a second character in the song. This was the golden hands. It was the architecture of Bach applied to American heartbreak. It was not support, it was a dialogue. Now listen to the album's title track, You Don't Mess Around with Jim. It's a classic Croce character study, a tough, funny bar-room story about a pool hustler, big Jim Walker, who gets his comeuppance. It's a piece of modern American folklore, a tall tale set to a swaggering rhythm. And underneath it all, Maury's guitar is no longer mournful. It's playful, percussive, almost bouncy. His guitar work provides the perfect, swaggering good time soundtrack to the tale, his notes dancing around Jim's vocals like a boxer in the ring, jabbing and weaving, adding to the song's infectious, confident energy. On every track of the album, this dynamic played out. Maury was the secret weapon. He had the uncanny and rare ability to truly listen, to find the emotional core of Jim's songs, and to create a guitar part that didn't just support the vocal, but elevated it, commented on it, and gave it a new dimension of depth and color. He was painting with sound. The producers would later refer to his golden hands, recognizing that the sophisticated yet universally accessible sound of the album, a sound that could appeal to both folk purists and pop radio listeners, was a direct result of Maury's unique, classically informed touch. Released in April of 1972, You Don't Mess Around with Jim was a massive out-of-the-box success. The album climbed all the way to #1 on the Billboard album charts, a stunning achievement for a debut artist. It would go on to sell millions of copies and spawn a string of hit singles. After years of grinding it out, Jim Croce was suddenly a superstar, the new, warm, and relatable voice of American folk rock. And Maury Muehleisen was right there with him, suddenly at the very center of the music world. He had found his calling not as the star he once dreamed of being, but as something perhaps even more special, the silent, indispensable partner to a shooting star. The world was finally hearing his music, even if they didn't know his name. The year 1973 was a whirlwind. It was a blur of highways, airports, television studios, and sold-out concert halls. The astonishing success of You Don't Mess Around with Jim had turned Croce and Muehleisen into one of the most in-demand acts in the country. They were on the road constantly, a traveling caravan bringing their unique brand of American storytelling to a nation that was hungry for it. They toured across the United States and Canada, playing to packed, adoring crowds in legendary clubs that were the cathedrals of the folk movement. Venues like the Bitter End in New York's Greenwich Village and the Main Point in Bryn Mawr near Philadelphia. These were intimate spaces where the audience could see the subtle interplay between the two musicians up close, where they could appreciate the breathtaking dexterity of Maury's playing. They also played to massive, enthusiastic audiences on college campuses across the nation, where Jim's intelligent, character-driven songs and Maury's sophisticated musicianship resonated deeply with a generation of young, thoughtful listeners. Their live show was a thing of intimate, powerful beauty. For most of the show, it was just two men and two acoustic guitars, but they created a sound that was as full, as dynamic, and as emotionally resonant as any rock band. The dynamic that had been forged in Jim's kitchen was now being shared with the world. Jim was the consummate storyteller. His warm, avuncular, man-of-the-people personality and his stable of unforgettable story songs instantly connecting with the audience. He would tell jokes, spin yarns about the characters in his songs, and make every person in the room, whether it was a small club or a large theater, feel like they were an old friend sitting in his living room. And beside him, Maury was the quiet anchor. On stage, he was pure, joyful concentration. He wasn't a flashy performer. His power was in his stillness and the intricate music that flowed from his hands. He was the perfect foil to Jim's gregarious stage presence. He rarely spoke, but his music said everything. The interplay between the two was a masterclass in musical empathy, each man seeming to anticipate the other's every move, their voices and guitars weaving together into a single, seamless, beautiful tapestry of sound. But behind that gentle smile and professional focus, a more complex question must have lingered. Maury Muehleisen was just 24 years old. Only 2 years prior, his own solo career had died on the vine, his Gingerbread album a commercial failure. Now he was an indispensable part of the biggest act in America, playing his music for millions. But was he himself, or had he become Jim's great shadow? There must have been an internal conflict. The introverted classical artist who loved the complex structure of Bach versus the relentless demand of the pop spotlight, playing the hits night after night. Was this partnership the greatest achievement of his life, or was it the moment his own solo career was permanently murdered? The answer perhaps was both. It had given him a success he could never have achieved alone, but the price was his own name. He was the soul of the machine, but Jim was the one at the wheel. In the midst of this relentless and often exhausting touring schedule, they somehow found the time to return to the studio to record their follow-up album, Life and Times. The pressure to follow up a '1 album was immense, but the creative partnership was at its absolute telepathic peak. The album, released in early 1973, was another triumph, a collection of songs that showcased Jim's growing confidence and maturity as a songwriter, and the ever-deepening, ever more intricate musical conversation between him and Maury. And on that album was the song that would become Jim Croce's biggest hit, the track that would propel him from a folk rock star into an international pop superstar. It was called Bad, Bad Leroy Brown. The song was a rollicking, theatrical, almost vaudevillian character study of the baddest man in the whole damn town. It was a perfect piece of American storytelling, a tall tale set to an irresistible, swinging, ragtime-inflected rhythm. The song shot to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart, and its success turned Jim Croce from a hero of the folk scene into a bona fide mainstream celebrity. And once again, if you listen closely, underneath the song's infectious sing-along chorus, Maury's guitar is a whirlwind of joyful activity. His playful, intricate, almost ragtime-inflected licks provide the song's unstoppable, good-time energy. The song would posthumously earn Jim a Grammy nomination for Best Pop Male Vocal Performance. But for those in the know, it was the ultimate testament to the infectious power of the duo. Life and Times was another multi-platinum smash. Croce and Muehleisen were on top of the world. They were a perfectly balanced, unstoppable team. Jim was the storyteller, Maury was the music. It was a partnership that seemed destined for years, even decades of continued success. They were creating a body of work that was poised to become a permanent part of the great American songbook. But fate and the cruel, random mechanics of the universe had a different and far more brutal plan. The relentless, dizzying success of 1973 was a dream come true. But, as is so often the case in the world of music, the dream was also a heavy burden. For Jim Croce, a man who, at his core, was a deeply devoted family man, the life of a touring superstar was becoming an increasingly painful exile. He loved the music. He loved the connection with the audience, but he was growing profoundly weary of the road. He was tired of the endless travel, of the lonely, anonymous hotel rooms, of the constant time away from his wife, Ingrid, and their young son, AJ, who was just a toddler. He was a man who wrote songs about home, about family, about the simple, profound truths of everyday life, and he was living a life that was increasingly and painfully disconnected from all of those things. The road, which had once been a path to his dream, was now becoming a cage. He had told his friends, his producers, and his family that this was it. After this final stretch of shows in the fall of 1973, he was planning to quit touring, at least for a while. He had achieved the success he had dreamed of, and now he just wanted to go home. He wanted to take a break from the relentless, soul-crushing machinery of fame and focus on what truly mattered to him, his songwriting and his family. He wanted to watch his son grow up. Maury, too, was feeling the strain of the constant motion. Though he loved the music with a deep and abiding passion, the quiet, introverted man was not naturally suited to the life of a touring rock star. He didn't crave the spotlight or the adulation. His joy came from the creation of the music itself, from the quiet, telepathic connection he shared with Jim on stage every night. But he was fiercely loyal to Jim, his friend and musical partner, and he was a consummate professional. They had one last album in the can, a record that would be titled I Got a Name, and a few more weeks of shows to play to support it. The end of the road, the promise of a rest, was in sight. They just had to get there. On the evening of September 20th, 1973, they were in the small, unassuming college town of Natchitoches, Louisiana. It was just another stop on a long and grueling tour, another pin on a map filled with identical pins. They had just played a well-received show for a crowd of enthusiastic students at Northwestern State University's Prather Coliseum. By all accounts, it was a standard professional gig, another night at the office for two men who were absolute masters of their craft. After the show, tired but satisfied, the band and their small entourage packed up and headed to the small local Natchitoches regional airport. They were scheduled to catch a chartered flight to their next show in Sherman, Texas. It should have been a routine, uneventful, hour-long flight. The plane waiting for them on the tarmac was a Beechcraft E-18S, a small twin-engine propeller plane, a common workhorse for such short-haul charter flights. The pilot was a man named Robert N. Elliott. The night was clear, the weather calm. There was no sense of danger, no premonition of doom. It was just another flight, on another night, on another tour. On board were 6 people, Jim Croce and his silent, essential partner, Maury Muehleisen. They were joined by their comedian opening act, George Stevens, their road manager, Kenneth Cortese, and their booking agent, Dennis Rast. The pilot, Robert Elliott, was at the controls. The plane taxied to the end of the short runway. It began its takeoff roll, but something was wrong, terribly wrong. For reasons that would be debated for years, the plane struggled to gain enough speed, to generate enough lift. According to the official report from the National Transportation Safety Board that would be released the following year, the plane barely got airborne. It lifted off the ground, its wheels just clearing the runway, but it failed to gain any significant altitude. It was flying too low and too slow. At the very end of the runway, in the darkness just beyond the airport's lights, stood a single, large, and fatally placed pecan tree. The impact was catastrophic. The small plane, its engines roaring at full power, struck the top of the tree. The collision tore the plane apart, and it erupted in a brief, violent fireball. There were no survivors. Jim Croce, the warm, beloved voice of a generation, was dead at the age of 30. Maury Muehleisen, the quiet, brilliant, and gentle musical prodigy, was just 24. The news of the crash sent a shock wave of grief and disbelief across the nation. The warm, friendly voice that had become a fixture on American radio was suddenly, brutally silenced. The shooting star had fallen from the sky. The NTSB investigation would later conclude that the primary cause of the crash was pilot error. The pilot had failed to ensure he had a clear flight path and had likely suffered a heart attack during the critical takeoff sequence, contributing to his inability to gain altitude. It was a senseless, pointless, and utterly preventable tragedy. Maury's funeral was held in his hometown of Trenton, a quiet, heartbreaking affair attended by his devastated family and close friends. He was buried at Holy Cross Cemetery, his incredible journey cut short, his immense and still unfolding potential tragically unrealized. In the immediate aftermath of the tragedy, a strange, beautiful, and poignant thing happened. The record label rushed to release a song from Croce's final posthumous album, I Got a Name. The song was Time in a Bottle, a beautiful, gentle, and deeply personal song about a father's love for his young child and the impossible universal desire to make time stand still. The song became a massive posthumous #1 hit on the Billboard charts. It became Jim Croce's most beloved and enduring song, a heartbreakingly beautiful eulogy for the man who sang it. And in the very heart of that song, the gentle, intricate, and unforgettable sound of Maury Muehleisen's guitar lived on, a final beautiful and eternal testament to a partnership that was as perfect as it was brief. The world mourned the loss of a great storyteller, but for those who listened closely, for those who knew the secret, they were also hearing the last, tragic, beautiful note of a quiet, forgotten genius. The music stopped. The plane crash that took the life of Jim Croce also extinguished the brilliant, flickering candle that was Maury Muehleisen. The world mourned the loss of a superstar, a voice that had felt like a friend. But in the long shadow cast by that tragedy, the story of the quiet man, the silent partner, was almost completely lost. The echo, it seemed, had died with the voice, but a talent that pure, a sound that beautiful, does not simply vanish into the ether. It lingers, it waits, it seeks a new way to be heard. The story of Maury Muehleisen did not end in that fiery wreckage in Louisiana. In many ways, a new, quieter, and far more profound story was just beginning. How is a legacy preserved when it was lived in the shadows? How does an echo survive in a world of silence? And how, 50 years later, do we finally learn the name of a genius the world never had a chance to properly learn? In the wake of the crash, the world of music was in a state of profound shock and mourning. The focus, naturally, was on Jim Croce. He was the star, the voice, the man whose face was on the album covers. The posthumous release of his final album, I Got a Name, in December 1973, was a massive cultural event. The album shot to number 2 on the Billboard charts, selling millions of copies, and cementing his status as a legendary, martyred figure in American music. His name was everywhere, and on every single track of that final heartbreaking album, the beautiful, intricate, and utterly essential guitar playing of Maury Muehleisen could be heard. He was the ghost in the machine, his sound a constant, poignant presence, even as his name was becoming a footnote. While the world was rediscovering Jim Croce through his posthumous hits, the much quieter, more personal work of preserving Maury's legacy fell to those who had known and loved him best. At the forefront of this effort was his younger sister, Maury Muehleisen. For Maury, the loss of her brother was not the loss of a musician. It was the loss of a beloved family member, a quiet, thoughtful, and brilliant young man whose life had been a source of immense pride. She became, in the decades that followed, the keeper of his flame. She meticulously collected his recordings, his photographs, and the stories of those who had known him. It was a quiet, personal, and often lonely mission, a labor of love dedicated to ensuring that her brother's story and his music would not be completely swallowed by the long shadow of the tragedy. The music industry, for its part, slowly began to recognize the magnitude of Maury's contribution. Producers like Tommy West, in interviews over the years, would consistently emphasize a crucial point. The classic Jim Croce sound was, in fact, the Croce Muehleisen sound. He would stress that Jim's earthy storytelling and Maury's sophisticated melodic playing were not two separate things, but two halves of a single, perfect whole. The sound that the world loved was inseparable from the quiet genius of Maury's guitar. In 1985, in a small but significant victory, Capitol Records reissued Maury's long-forgotten solo album, Gingerbread. It allowed a new small audience of music connoisseurs to discover the work of a brilliant singer-songwriter in his own right, to hear the voice that had been silenced too soon. The true modern revival of Maury Muehleisen's legacy began in the 21st century, thanks in large part to the tireless efforts of his sister, Maury. In 2013, she launched MauryMuehleisen.com, a beautiful and comprehensive website dedicated to her brother's life and work. It became a digital archive, a place where fans, old and new, could find his music, see rare photographs, and read heartfelt testimonials from friends and fellow musicians. It was a single defiant flame lit against the darkness of being forgotten. The rise of the internet and platforms like YouTube also played a crucial role. A new generation of music lovers, digital archaeologists digging for buried treasure, began to rediscover Maury's work. They found Gingerbread. They found rare bootlegged live recordings of his performances with Jim, and they began to share his story. Music magazines and blogs started to write articles not about Jim Croce's sideman, but about Maury Muehleisen, the lost guitar genius of the 1970s. His influence began to be recognized by a new generation of guitarists. In the revival of acoustic fingerstyle folk music in the 2010s and 2020s, his name started to be mentioned alongside the greats. His unique style, that perfect, beautiful bridge between classical technique and heartfelt folk storytelling, was finally being studied and appreciated. The story has even come full circle. Jim Croce's son, A.J. Croce, a talented musician in his own right, has often paid tribute to Maury in his own concerts, recognizing the essential role Maury played in his father's success. Plans for tribute concerts in Trenton featuring AJ and local artists have been discussed, a testament to the fact that in his hometown his memory is still very much alive. But the true tragedy, the total obliteration the crash caused, was not just about what was lost, it was about all that never had the chance to exist. Consider this. Jim Croce was exhausted and determined to quit touring. That fateful tour was intended to be his last. So what would Maury Muehleisen, at age 24, have done next in 1974? Armed with the fame, experience, and credibility from co-creating a string of #1 hits, would he have relaunched his solo career? This time, a public trained to love his sound might have been ready for Gingerbread 2.0. Or would he have become something else? Something for which his unique talent seemed destined, a master producer, an arranger genius for other artists, a Rick Rubin of the folk pop scene. Maury's death was not just the death of a guitarist. It was the destruction of an infinite musical future. The tragedy was not just that he died, but that he died just before we ever found out who he truly could have become. That was the final obliteration. So where, then, does Maury Muehleisen ultimately belong in the story of music? It is not one of Grammys or platinum records in his own name. His is a quieter, more profound legacy. He is a testament to the power of the silent partner, the quiet collaborator, the artist whose genius lies not in seeking the spotlight, but in making the person in the spotlight shine brighter. His life was a story of profound, almost heartbreaking contradiction. He was a musician with the talent to be a star in his own right, but whose quiet, introverted nature made him perfectly suited to the role of a supportive partner. His one attempt at a solo career was a commercial failure, but his work as a sideman helped to sell millions upon millions of records. He is a powerful and moving reminder that the history of music is not just the story of the frontmen, the voices, and the superstars. It is also the story of the quiet men and women in the shadows, the brilliant instrumentalists, the tasteful arrangers, the secret weapons, whose contributions, though often uncredited and unsung, are utterly essential. In the end, Maury Muehleisen's story is a beautiful, if tragic, song of partnership. He was the moon to Jim Croce's sun, providing the cool, gentle, and beautiful light that allowed the star to shine so brightly. For 2 brief, brilliant years, they were one of the most perfect pairings in music history. And while his name may never be as famous as that of the man he stood beside, his legacy is forever intertwined with the timeless music they created together. He is the quiet, beautiful, and eternal echo that lives within the voice of his friend. He is the sound of time forever captured in a bottle,